the fourth dimension of warfare and Ukraine's surprising advantage in it. We have faith, AI, and warfare, and the criminal underworld and how that fits into irregular warfare. I hope that you are excited as I am. Stick around, grab yourself a drink, and we'll talk about it next. Hello there, everybody, and welcome back to this week's episode of the End of the Week, an international relations and national defense podcast and news review show. I'm very excited, as always, to be here with you. I do have to say I'm recording this on Wednesday, the 8th of July, and we do have some breaking news that I did want to talk about real quick before we get into all the other stuff. It looks like the memorandum of understanding that we talked about a couple weeks ago is now broken. The administration has said that the ceasefire is over and the U.S. has begun attacks. But that's something, it is breaking news. As I'm recording this, we'll probably find out more by the time you're listening to this on Saturday. But I did want to address that first off. But welcome in, everybody. It is I, your friend Morgan Houston, a.k.a. Whiskey Mo, the internet's least famous academic. I am a scholar of irregular warfare, national defense policy, history, and information. The list has been growing a lot. I've been reading about the Federal Depository Library Program, and really interesting. And if you've got one, you can access all public documents for free from that library. But as always, I'm very excited to be here. We've got three, two-ish stories that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the fourth domain and underwater drones. We're going to talk about AI and what is ethical use for it in the military. And then we're also going to talk about irregular warfare, criminal undergrounds, and drugs. So let's go ahead and roll. First story today. I subscribe to The War on the Rocks, which is an excellent online national defense and foreign policy journal that is mostly got an American focus, but it is really good with having a lot of international voices. And ever since the second invasion of Ukraine in 2022, they've really done a good job of trying to maintain an awareness for everyone on what is going on. It started with the Russia Contingency by Michael Kaufman, who is a phenomenal scholar of Russia and Ukraine. And recently they have added a new newsletter called the Ukraine Compass, where they try and give you a perspective of what is happening from a Ukrainian voice. And there was an excellent article about warfare in the fourth domain. And what the author was talking about in the fourth domain is underwater autonomous vehicles, UAVs in a different way, but these are drones that are being utilized in the underwater aspect. And what makes these so unique is that they're much more difficult to defend compared to your land or air drones because you can't see them. Like that's one of the benefits of things like submersibles and submarines is that it takes radar, it takes an active system to recognize that they're there. And this article is phenomenal, and as always, if you're interested, I will put links to everything in the show notes. But this author, while a Ukrainian, made a point of addressing the development and building of these drones from multinational aspects. And what he was talking about was really actually kind of shocking to me, as I did not expect, and I shouldn't have been surprised, but I did not expect China to have such a massive lead on the manufacturing of underwater systems. And he has utilized some acronyms that I'm not very comfortable using, just because I can't remember them. There's like large, small, extra large, underwater, and there's a lot of letters to them, but they're all essentially the different sizes. But he talks about the different perspectives. There's some pictures. I will put it right here that you can look at the picture. And then, but what I thought was the most interesting about all of this, and this I did know about, but it's really interesting because Ukraine has a very unique tactical advantage when it comes to these systems. We can see going back to the beginning of the war when Ukraine was utilizing these unmanned and autonomous systems to attack Russia's Black Sea Fleet. And I was already impressed by that. And I'm not a drone guy. I like to talk about them because I think they're really important, but I am not as enamored with autonomous weapons and autonomous vehicles as a lot of others in this space are, but I do see the value in them. And I think this is one of the spaces where NATO and the United States particularly can utilize our connections with the Ukrainians and learn a whole lot about what they are doing. And I think that could really create a partnership that could really help and not only bolster the United States and Ukraine, but NATO as a whole. Because one of the biggest things that in this space right now, when it comes to the more American and West, so quote unquote Western perspective, is the defense of Europe from an aggressive Russia. And I think being simpatico with Ukraine and working to have some connected tissue there where we can help each other out could really go a long ways to stabilizing the region as well as countering Russian aggression. There's always going to be some underhandedness from Russia, and we'll talk about some of that later in our story number 2, because the next story is kind of 1A. But one of the things that they didn't really address was how these things are being utilized, or how they're utilized, but not how they're being controlled. Are they being controlled autonomously? Are they being controlled remotely? I think this is a space that we should really be watching. And I'm going to shout out, I'm going to also put the link to his webpage. H.I. Sutton is someone that I have just recently found through this article. He is a scholar of naval irregular warfare and ships and all these things, and which is I'm not a Navy guy. I'm not a drones guy. So like I'm going to be going back to his website and reading his work a lot, because he's going to really educate me on this space. I will never claim to be an expert in these things, but it's something that I think that y'all would find really interesting. It seems that is one of the more popular things that we can talk about here on the internet, is the use of drones in warfare. But that it kind of dovetails on to our next story. So in the same place, War on the Rocks, this week, a Dr. Craig Douglas Albert, who is the director of the graduate program of intelligence defense and cybersecurity at Augusta University, wrote a phenomenal piece about how he is dealing with the study and implementation and policy recommendations of AI in military spaces, and the Pope's homily on AI, the Magnifica Humanitas. I am horrible at Latin. I've never studied it, so my apologies. But this is probably one of the best pieces I have ever read when it came to the intersection of the study of security studies and faith. And I find this really interesting. When I did my undergraduate, I did my undergraduate in history at Metro State University of Denver. And I did a lot of work around early medieval Christianity. So while I am not a man of faith myself, I am deeply tied to it, and I find it fascinating, and I find faith to be really, really important for a lot of people. And I think that this is a really interesting thing, because he talks about having read it, which that's going to be next up for me. I'm planning on reading it. It's about 51 pages as I was getting ready to print it out from online. But from the consensus of what I'm reading is that this is, one, the Pope's homily is very strong in a condemnation of war in general, right? There has been a long time of the acceptance of what the church would call a just war, right? And this is the idea that while war is horrible and should be avoided, there are times when a war can be just because it is defending the lives of civilians or against a genocide or those kinds of things. But what it appears to be talking about in this case is that there's no such thing as a just war anymore. The idea of just war has been utilized to justify just almost every war of anyone who has a Catholic or nation that has a Catholic majority or a sizable Catholic population. But then it's trying to figure out if there's a middle ground here, specifically with AI. And it's this idea of to get rid of the binary of either we're all in on fully allowing weapon systems to be autonomous and the use of large language models and other forms of what we would now call AI, and then it's just a complete restriction on and no use of AI. And I think Dr. Albert's argument is pretty solid here, because one of the things that he points to is that we do have, in the US at least, regulations when it comes to the discussion of how we're going to use autonomous systems within what we would call the kill chain. And that is from sensing a target, someone finding it, sensing it, and all the way through the idea of, like in my particular case as a former JTAC, the cleared hot call, dropping the weapon system, allowing the release and authorizing the release. But the problem with our regulations is that they're vague, right? There's 2 DoD regulations, which I will put in the thing below, on autonomous weapon systems, and another one on civilian harm reduction, which is really important. But the problem with this too is not only are those vague, but the current administration has completely defanged the Department of Defense's harm reduction system to the point where they have completely shut down the harm reduction office. I have an internet colleague. We both served as tactical air control party airmen, him at a much different level than me because he had a full career. His name is Wes Bryant. I highly recommend checking him out. He wrote a book called Targeting the Caliphate, I believe. I will put a link to his book in the description below. He was one of the main targeting officers for the fight against ISIS. And the thing is that he was the head of civilian harm reduction inside the Pentagon. And they fired him. And I think it's really important for us to understand that we have to understand the ethical use of AI, not just in our daily life, but also how as we apply it to national security. There was an article, it's going to take me way too long to find it, but it was talking about Israeli use of large language models and AI systems to target Palestinians, and how unethical that system was, in the fact that it was targeting and destroying families and civilians and children and women. And these are things that I'm very glad that reporter was doing it, because these are the things that need to be brought to light, because we can see how dangerous these things are. And I think there was a line that Dr. Albert wrote that I think really codifies how important this is, and how we should be looking from a moral standpoint of using this. He says, and I quote, "It is good that Magnifica Humanitas refuses to let companies, policymakers, military personnel, or scholars such as myself hide from moral responsibility behind opaque algorithms." And I think this is just the start of a long discussion about what AI is going to look like in the battle space, from the strategic to the tactical. I am not an AI hater. I'm not a Luddite when it comes to it. I think that it's important to have this, because if we don't use it, others will. And if we don't put the guardrails on it, then no guardrails will be there. So I think it's really important. So stay tuned. I'm going to continue to talk about this stuff. I think it's really important. But again, I'm going to put the article down below. Story number 3, I guess it depends on how you want to look at it. I read a fascinating article in the New York Times this week about Estonia and its battle against fentanyl. Essentially, Estonia, by creating a task force in the mid-2000s, the mid-2010s, I can't remember exactly when, they essentially eradicated fentanyl use and have really done a good job of bringing people out of the addiction, supporting them when it comes to battling the addiction of fentanyl. The problem is that they are now finding other synthetic opioids that they can't counter, that are much stronger and much more potent. And it is a very, very big struggle. And the reason this caught my mind in this is one of the very unique things of the space of irregular warfare. When we talk about irregular warfare is essentially what we would call in the military everything left of bang, which is everything before the declaration of war. And there is not an insignificant amount of times that states have used organized crime or non-state actors to bring forth their policy goals in ways that they can do this. I mean, one of the examples is using Napoli's mafia in Italy during World War II. But one of the things is that what the people who were continuously bringing in the fentanyl and now are part of the creation of these synthetic opioids are Russian organized crime outfits that have some ties to the Russian state. And where this is hit the most is in the northeastern part of Estonia, where there are direct ties to Russia, there are direct links across the border into Russia, and where it's heavily dominated by ethnic Russians and Russian speakers. And I think what this does is it can really point out how no matter how hard a organization or a country tries, a state tries to get its hands wrapped around the problem of organized crime in the criminal underworld, that is something that is always there. Anytime that a government bans something, there are always going to be people who are going to want to use it either or do that thing either because they are just naturally rebellious, they have addiction issues. There's all these things, and it's one of the things that where if a nation is not careful, we can always be susceptible to organized crime organizations that have ties to not the Russian state specifically, but that is one of the options, but to an adversarial nation. And it's something where communication between the levels of government, federal, state, and local, in our case, can be really important. And this is one of those things that national security shouldn't just be thought of at the federal level. Like, what are our local policing agencies doing to report and connect with federal organizations when it comes time to organize crime, about what those are, intelligence and counterintelligence? And I think this is really important as we take a deep dive into what the state of the world is going to look like. We can see within Russia itself, with some of the organizations after the Wagner Group was essentially eradicated and rebranded. Some of those members who were members of the Wagner Group are career criminals who have been pulled out of prison, who are leading essentially a state arm in Africa and Ukraine. That they will have ties to criminal organizations and criminal underground, which could be used to advance foreign policy goals or just to undermine state control in allies of the United States. Because as we can see, Russia is a revisionist power who wants to change the shape of the world to where they are leading instead of being a Western-led and in the past an American-led international order. And this is a unique way that can be done. We always see when it comes to Russia, they're very, very comfortable at utilizing many of the tools of irregular warfare when we talk about things like the internet when it comes to bot farms or misinformation organizations. There are elements within the FSB, within the GRU that actively utilize the internet to misinform and to lead astray the American populace when it comes time to vote, when it comes time to make policy decisions, because media literacy has unfortunately taken a hit. And so it makes it really hard to tell the truth from a falsity, and the falsities move much faster than the truth does on the internet. And so these are things that can be done. They could be done through government organizations, or they could be done through illicit means that just are funded through the government and the weird ways that can happen. I mean, the U.S. has done this with other organizations when it comes through our intelligence organization. So it's these are things that are really important for us to keep an eye on as we go forward. I think it was a very well written, and it was a heartbreaking article as well, because one of the main threads was this carpenter who had been addicted to fentanyl, got clean, and then was struggling with life, and then found one of these synthetic opioids, and then eventually got to rehab, lost contact with his daughter, and spoiler alert, it ends with him reconnecting with his daughter. And it's an amazing, sweet story, but it's sad and scary. And I think as security practitioners and policymakers and academics, those are things that it's these diverse interconnections and the intersections of policing, intelligence, crime, social work. These things all impact the national security of our nation. And I think it's easy to get lost in the idea that it's the DOD or it's the FBI or CIA that only handles it. It's these big organizations out in DC, but it's also here locally with us when they say that all politics are local politics. This is how national security becomes local politics. So that is it for this week's episode, y'all. Thank you, as always, for listening. I was really excited to record this episode. I'm recording it early because I have stuff this weekend, but I'm also recording it early because I was so excited to talk about this stuff. All of these articles were phenomenal. I hope you take a look. I will give you one warning. The first article about the fourth domain and underwater drones, it is in Ukrainian, so you'll need to use a translation. It was a little finicky for me through Google. I'm hoping they will post an English version to the English version of the website that they have. That'll make it easier. But right now, the only thing I have is the Ukrainian. But as you can see, this is a very exciting stuff. Things move very fast in the defense space, especially when we talk about technology. So I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. As always, if you found value in this, please go ahead and gently caress that like button, that thumbs up button. I've had some real fluctuating episodes recently. I've had a lot of views. I've had only 1 or 2 views. So it really does help. If you found some value in this, please go ahead and hit that thumbs up button. Also, please subscribe. I would love for you to become a part of this community. Eventually, I would like to create this as a space where we can have discussions, where we can talk about what's happening within national defense, with foreign policy, and I'd love to create a community around this. I love talking about this stuff. This is how I get better at it, by expressing it to y'all, and I hope that you learn something and give me a little bit of a reward by giving me a subscribe. It's free. It doesn't hurt you. It doesn't cost you anything. Also, if you want to know when these videos come out, go ahead and hit the notification bell. I'm working on stuff again. I was going to do that architecture video, and then guess what? 3 of them popped up on my YouTube feed, and they were all very good. So if you want to watch stuff about architecture and fascism, just search it in the YouTube bar. They were so good. I was very, very, very impressed. But as always, if you, or how about this? Even one no, I'll put it right here. If you would like, you can support me on Patreon. I don't have anything special for it right now. I'm hoping to actually get this as a routine where I can drop episodes at least a day early, and that would be a special benefit to the Patreon. It's not there yet, but I'm getting there. It's just $5 a month is what I have it set up as, and it really does. This is not cheap. And as I want to get better and provide better services, make this a better production, it will cost a little bit of money. But as always, I thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. You could be doing so much other things, and I hope you learned something. And I hope, again, to see you at the end of the week.